Hello and thanks for joining us for this exclusive interview on Africa 24. As President of the Afreximbank, Professor Benedict Oramah, who is playing a leading role in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and leading the creation and deployment of very innovative digital platforms that will boost intra-regional trade and investments by evolving cross-border payments and improving access to quality trade information. Under his leadership, Afreximbank is supporting the harmonization of standards and the development of quality infrastructure across Africa as part of a wider industrialization and export development strategy. As chair of the Board of Trustees of the African Union COVID-19 Response Fund, President Benedict Oramah is helping to coordinate grants, mobilization, and efficient utilization across Africa, as well as coordinating the procurement and distribution of medical supplies amongst African countries. He is also leading other continental and private sector initiatives to scale up Africa's health and economic post-pandemic growth. So how exactly is Afreximbank involved in the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Afreximbank is a strong partner of the AFCFTA Secretariat and the African Union Commission in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. You see, the uniqueness of the AFCFTA is that it's perhaps the only agreement that has a bank behind it. Afreximbank was established in 1993, but the founding fathers had the vision of the day in the future when Africa will have a continental free trade agreement, a common market, a customs union. They knew that the success of such an endeavor will be underpinned by a financial institution that will provide a capital that would drive the businesses. So it was only natural that Afreximbank became a partner of the AFCFTA. So we are doing everything that AFCFTA needs, but the AFCFTA Secretariat and the AU are not equipped to do. And what are those things? We have launched a Pan-African payment and settlement system, which we fully developed, working with the central bank and others, and in collaboration with the African Union and the AFCFTA Secretariat. Now it is operating. We have also launched the pilot for the collaborative transit guarantee scheme. We have 16 landlocked countries on the continent. So goods have to move across borders by road or rail. But we have fragmented transit guarantee schemes. So you need to have one that will become more efficient, and that is what we've done, again, working with the Secretariat and the AU Commission. We have put in place strong financing packages to support businesses that do trade. These are just some of the things we've done. There are other things we are doing in the area of trade information, in the area of guarantees, supporting the introduction of an adjustment facility that will be required to make the trade agreement effective. The adjustment facility will make it possible for countries that will suffer from tariff revenue losses to adjust in an orderly manner to that. It also equipped companies to adjust their production capabilities to enable them to produce for the market. So you can see there's a symbiotic relationship. The governments, the Secretariat, the AU Commission work on the policy and the regulations. Afreximbank is focused on the financing, while the businesses do the trading.
All right, so can you please give us in figures the import and export levels of Africa as of today?
About $1 trillion, that is overall. Intra-regional, we're about 170, I don't know what the figures are for last year, they are still being collected, $170 billion. As we can see, it's about 17%. We are all looking forward to boosting this to closer to 24–30%. And it is the AFCFTA that will be able to do that. We are not happy that although the continent trades at a level of $8 trillion, sometimes $1.2 trillion, but it doesn't trade as much amongst itself. It does $150 to $170 billion of intra-regional trade. That is what we have to change.
So throughout your professional career, you have advocated for the funding of African industries to strengthen our production capacity and export volumes. How has this contributed to the growth of African trade?
Well, you know, we need to add value to what we export. We need to trade value-added products. If you look at the way the global trade has evolved over time, since the past 15–20 years, the share of commodities in global trade has shrunk to less than 15%, from something around 30%, 35%. So whereas overall, globally, the commodities are becoming less and less important in trade, Africa's share of commodities trade is expanding. So what does that tell you? If you're running your own business, what will you do? You are expanding in an uncompetitive area, so you need to move out of that place. That is common sense. But let's even look at the impact. If I export a barrel of oil today, and the barrel of crude oil, that barrel of crude oil is shipped to somewhere in Asia or wherever to be refined. Shipping costs are paid, insurance costs are paid, other logistic costs are paid. It goes to be refined. It's shipped back to me as refined petroleum products. Again, shipping costs are paid, logistic costs are paid, profit margins are added. What does that tell you? You will never balance your economy. You will never. The only reason we don't see this is because these imbalances are not obvious in a dynamic sense. And that is why the concentration in commodities is why Africa is the only continent that suffers from a shock when things happen. Because we are always in a perpetual imbalance. So when you have the pandemic, you have commodity price shocks, immediately things stop and the imbalance manifests. We are no longer covered by the time we are buying because over time, sometimes time-wise, it looks to you like you're in surplus, whereas you are not. So
how can this be addressed, sir?
We have to produce more value-added products. And our approach to producing more value-added products does not necessarily mean that we process the commodities we have on the continent. Whereas that can be an approach with some particular commodities, it will not hold true for some others. Why? Africa has an abundant supply of labor. What Africa does not have is capital. So if converting what I have as a raw commodity will require more capital than labor, and the cost of capital to me is very high because I don't have it, making that conversion will not be effective because others who have better capital, cheaper capital, will do the conversion more efficiently than I can do. Any decision to go into value add must be done in a very critical way. People should look at it very critically and find out what works best for them.
So what is your forecast for intra-African trade for the next decade on the continent? Can you give us some insights of the key economic sectors that can contribute to the development and industrialization of the African continent from your experience?
Well, I like the question on where we expect it to be in the next 10 years. And I'm not going to go by what the statistics say. I'll go by what I believe will happen because of the work we are doing, which may not be obvious to some others, or which others may not think will ever work. Now, we've done the AFCFTA. The agreement is there. There's a political will to do things. we have a strong team at the Secretariat. We have the AU supporting everything about the AFCFTA. We have enthusiasm amongst our businesses to support the AFCFTA. They are looking forward to it. So what does that tell me? That the innovations that we are doing to drive the trade would achieve the results we expect. The payment system we are doing will bring many of the trade that is diverted out of the continent back to the continent. The export trading companies we are creating, we make sure we also formalize some of the informal trade that we see today. The financing we are planning to put in place for the next 5 years, we plan to disburse about another $40 billion on a revolving basis in support. And that's just Afreximbank. The information platforms we have built, which we have introduced, all these are going to promote the trade. So what I expect is that in the next 10 years, it is intra-African trade that will lead the growth of overall African trade. And when I say that, I go again to the earlier discussion we had about adding value. Because intra-African trade will boost regional value chains. It will boost regional value chains in labor-intensive activities that I mentioned earlier. That alone today accounts for about $40 to $60 billion of the imports we do into the continent today. So what I expect is that we're going to boost intra-regional value chains, production, and trade. So since that would drive the trade, people expect that in the next 10 years, total African trade will be about $2.5 billion. I expect that intra-African trade will be heading towards $800 billion. That's what I expect in 10 years. In fact, if it doesn't do that, we failed. Because what is the benefit of doing all of this? And it means then, and when I say failure, I mean failure in all aspects of what the continent is doing. Because unless we do this, moving the trade to $2.53 trillion will not happen. So the impact on the growth, the GDP overall, will be so bad, given the way our population grows. So the key is intra-African trade. And I expect that we are going to make a huge success of it in the next decade.
So you are taking part in the 35th African Union Summit held under the theme, Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent, Accelerate the Human Capital, Social and Economic Development. In your opinion, how are nutrition and food security related to achieving Africa's economic growth?
Well, anything we do for development must be done around people. It's human development that counts. Nutrition, food security is critical in ensuring that a hungry man is an angry man. When people do not have enough food, if they're not fed well, other things begin to happen. You start having crisis, you start having terrorism, you start having extremism. People who are not fed well will not think well. So we're not going to be able to compete. We're not going to win the digital war that is going on now. So for us, the development of our human capital, I don't want to use human capital, so we don't look at it as just a factor of production. But our human beings, the human beings must be the center of development. And that the beginning is to make sure you feed the human being well. If you feed the human being well, then you can get the best. It will be better educated, because we also need well-educated people. You get healthy population. If you have healthy population, there will be productive population. That is why this theme is very, very important. It's very good, and I'm happy that it is something that the entire AU membership adopted yesterday.
So as member of the high-level dialogue during the Africa Business Forum, experts say adequate and efficient infrastructure and services across all modes of transport and tourism are critical to reaping full benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area and economic growth. What is Afreximbank's vision for the transport sector contribution in African countries?
The transport sector is very, very, very critical. Now, globally, the air transport alone, for example, carries about 35% of goods. But Africa is a continent, it is a very large continent. Don't mind the way it is depicted in the world map. The area you see as Africa will contain the present United States, Europe, some parts of Asia, and you still have some land remaining. So it's a very, very large continent. What does that tell you? If you want to move people around, if you want to move goods around, all critical for moving the AfCFTA, you need to have an efficient transport system. And when I say efficient, I mean very good and integrated transport system. You have rail, road, and air, all done in an integrated manner. And I emphasize this word integrated because our continent has suffered from years of colonialism that fragmented the continent into 55 countries and then caused the infrastructure development to take an approach and a direction that was not intended to integrate the continent, but rather to drive trade between each of the colonies and the metropolitan powers. So what we need to do now is to change that. To change that means a new set of infrastructure that will be integrated. That is what will drive the regional value chains I mentioned. That is what will drive the movement of people and the tourism, the intra-regional tourism that we hope will also begin to drive our economies.
So what is your take on public-private partnership contribution in achieving Africa's Development Africa 2063 agenda?
Well, let me look at it from the point of view of infrastructure, because that is where you see most public-private partnership being done. If you look at the estimates that have been put out as a requirement, infrastructure investments we need for the next 10 years, so I have said it between $60 and $100 billion per year. Let's take the higher part, that is $100 billion per year. So in 10 years, we need about $1 trillion to do the infrastructure. Now, even on an annual basis, $100 billion per year is about 50% of the total budget of all African countries. So what does that tell you? So even if the countries forget about every other thing and put all their budget, they can't do it. So it means you need private investment. So that's why the public-private partnership is critical. But because we need to build that integrated infrastructure I mentioned, that changes what we have currently, change the direction in a way that will promote regional value chains. What it means then is that we have to make intra-regional infrastructure bankable. The only way to make intra-regional infrastructure bankable is to make sure that we now trade more amongst ourselves. We do not have too much money to build like the Japanese, the Chinese, who say, okay, we build, they will follow. Many of the private businesses will follow businesses rather than going to invest when they do not see the business. So what do we now need to do? That is why Afreximbank is working very hard to make sure we provide the trade information that is required to boost intra-regional trade. Because we know that when now we have the trade information and people begin to trade more amongst themselves, we will begin to make regional infrastructure bankable and begin to attract the private financing that we need to be able to meet the financing gap to build Africa's infrastructure to the levels we want.
Thank you so much, sir. Africa 24 is very pleased to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for following up this interview. Stay tuned for more on Africa 24.